Hello and welcome to the Becoming Your Highest Self podcast. I'm your host, Macie Renae, and we are going on a journey together, my friend. If you've been looking for a podcast geared towards your growth, self-awareness, navigating your brain's daily mind drama, and deep inner work to become your highest and best self, you are in the perfect place. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Becoming Your Highest Self podcast. How are you all doing? Hopefully well. I know that it's been challenging the last few months. First we get hit with the COVID-19, quarantine, managing our mind. Then we get hit with what's going on in the world with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and a lot of tough conversations about race and systematic oppression and what it's like to be a Black person in today's times. And I know that these are conversations that are very difficult and things that maybe we oftentimes want to shy away from and run away from, or pretend that it's not happening because, again, the brain loves comfort. But I have to say that these are conversations where we need to be willing to have them. And this was going on even last week where people were protesting, some peacefully, some areas it was getting out of hand. And I have to be honest that when I recorded last week's episode, I had thought about discussing what was happening in the world because I am biracial. So if you don't follow me on social media and you are strictly just a listener of my work, I'm biracial. And I guess I've mentioned that on the podcast, but I don't know how much people pay attention. But it was a very rough week, between me being biracial and being raised in a white household my entire life, but marrying into a Black family. My husband is Black. There were a lot of emotions, And last week I just didn't feel like I was quite in the place to talk about them because, as I have said in this podcast many a times, is when emotions are high, intelligence is low. And so when we are in very high emotion, it can be very hard to convey a message, especially one that is not particularly biased based on the high emotions that we're feeling. But I did express what I was thinking last week on my Facebook. So if you follow me on Facebook, I'm sure you saw it. And I tried to repost it to Instagram. I don't know that it, reached as many people on Instagram. But what shocked me, I was just speaking from the heart based on our experience in the midst of all of this. And it was very well received. I got a lot of messages. The post had 121 shares, which was very shocking to me. And I basically shared what it was like for my husband and I, me being biracial and him being Black, with everything that's going on in the world. And it's heavy and it's hard to talk about and nobody really wants to, but it's something that is so very necessary because while there are people that believe that racism doesn't exist or that it's not like, the way that it used to be, it's still very real for us that are experiencing judgment and stereotypes and racism and bias. It's systematic oppression. It's just a very real thing. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to talk about. A lot of people I think want to help and want to do the right thing, but that also means looking into your stuff. So just like we talk about in this podcast in general, looking at your stuff that needs healing, our thoughts that we're having often stem from things that were programmed during our subconscious, which we're going to talk about today. And it is very hard to rewire our mind, especially if you as a person, you feel like I'm not biased, I'm not, racist, I'm not prejudiced. All of us have our own biases. Even me as a biracial woman, because I was raised in a white household that had a lot of thoughts about Black people. That's just the truth. And I have had to learn how to question them as an adult. So what I wanted to talk about on the podcast today was how our mindset works. Like, I want you to really understand why this is a problem today from a personal development standpoint, from an understanding of how your brain operates. And I'm talking to everyone, Black people, white people, people of all cultures, people of all races, men, women, everyone, okay? This is for everyone. So when we're little, like birth to 7 years old, our brain is primarily in alpha and theta brainwaves, okay? Like birth to 2, it's delta, then it goes into theta, then it goes into alpha. And what's important to know during these stages of your life, that when your brainwaves are in this frequency, it's the same as someone who is in a deep trance, like basically meditating. And it's during these first 7 years of life where your brain is being programmed. So you don't have logical thinking the first 7 years of your life for most children. You are a sponge. Everything that you hear, everything that's in your environment, everything that your parents say, it is going in your ears and programming itself into your mind. You don't have the ability to subjectively say, no, I don't want that thought, or no, I don't want that belief, or no, I don't agree with that. You don't have that ability because your brain waves during the first 7 years of life are basically just programming. So as a parent, it matters what you are teaching your children, what your own biases are, what thoughts you're having, what beliefs you have, the things that you're saying about yourself as a parent, the things that you're saying to your children. All of it matters because the first 7 years of life, your child is absorbing it like a sponge. They don't get to disagree with it. It is what it is. Okay? With that being said, the same is true for you. Whatever your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, your teachers, whatever they were saying, whatever they were thinking, whatever environments they put you in, that mattered your first 7 years of life. So when I'm working with people energetically, the reason that this is so important for me to know and get to the bottom of what they've experienced in their life, especially if it's the first 7 years of life, is because we energetically hold things without even knowing. So those first 7 years, everything gets programmed in your subconscious. And again, you don't have control over it. You didn't get to, push it away. You didn't get to disagree. You didn't get to have any opinion over what things were entering into your mind because your brain waves don't allow it to be so at that age. That's why it's so important. So if you grew up in a lot of trauma, which I did, right? You have a lot of heartache and pain stored in your subconscious. You also have a lot of thoughts, and those thoughts are not always true. So the reason that I'm bringing this up in regards to what we have going on in the world right now is because a lot of our bias or our prejudice or racist thoughts and actions come from the things that we heard in a subconscious manner from people that we were around. Not saying that they were right, but your brain doesn't have the ability to kick it out. So I'm going to be very real and very vulnerable. And I'm going to give you some examples of this, okay, in a bunch of different ways. So one of the things that I think parents say, and maybe don't realize how this can create belief systems for their children, are, and it comes very innocently at times, but there's bias to it, is like, don't ever go in that neighborhood. That's a bad neighborhood. Okay. And as a child, you don't get to say all the time why and actually understand the answer to it. But if you do ask why, because kids do ask why, your parent might say something like, well, because there are a lot of poor people down here and they're angry, or there's a lot of Black people down here and there's a lot of crime, or maybe they don't even give you a reason, but your little eyes begin to observe what's going on in that community that your parent tells you don't go in this neighborhood. And so maybe your eyes as a child notices that when you all go through this neighborhood and when your parent says that, you see a specific race. And then subconsciously you begin to program that those are bad neighborhoods, or those are less than neighborhoods, or whatever it may be. Same thing with if a parent has a lot of negative self-talk about themselves. If they're constantly like, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I hate my hips, I hope you don't get my hips, I hope this, I hope that. And they don't love themselves, they don't love their body. As a child, when you're hearing that, you're absorbing this negative self-talk. So not only are you learning how to negative self-talk, but you're learning the pieces that aren't good based on the parent's perspective of what's not good. So to give you a real life example, before I was an occupational therapist, I was what we call a CLS worker in Kentucky, and that is community living support. So I would work with children with special needs, take them out in the community, and help them learn life skills so that they could be more independent. And I had a kiddo on my caseload, and one day we were driving and we passed these two construction workers that were working on the median. They had their shirts off, they were sweaty and very dark skinned. They weren't Black, but they just had dark tan skin from being in the sun all the time. And my client said, ew, gross. I think probably, let me think of the age, probably like 11, I would say. But again, special needs, so intellectually and developmentally delayed. And I laughed over the comment of put a shirt on, dude, because that's what he said. And then he proceeds to say, I don't like brown people. And I'll never forget it. And I turned around in my car and I said, what? And he repeated himself, I don't like brown people. And I said, bud, I'm brown. And he was like, yeah, but you're not like most brown people, Miss Macie. He was like, most brown people are very, very loud, and they always talk back to the teacher, and they're just always in trouble. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah. He goes, every brown kid in my class is just loud and always in trouble with the teacher. And I was so taken back. But you guys, this is a perfect example of what our brain does. So whether or not he had heard something from another adult or not, his little eyes began to create a pattern and reinforce it every single time. So this is the next part of what our brain does. Subconsciously, we begin to hear things, see things, beliefs, thoughts, perceptions. And then what the brain does is it begins to look for evidence to prove that we're right. So whatever thoughts subconsciously become programmed, your brain then looks for the evidence to reinforce that thought to make sure that it's true. So this is the same with like our reticular activating system, right? If you want a red Toyota Camry and you have this thought of everywhere I go, I see a red Toyota Camry, and your brain's focused on that, even if it's a subconscious thought, you are going to see red Toyota Camrys. You're going to believe that you see them everywhere all the time because that's what your brain is looking for. It's always looking for evidence to be right. So in this particular example, this kiddo was seeing constantly that children of darker skin in his class often spoke out, maybe, towards the teacher, and that the teacher was reprimanding those children. And in his brain, he began to have the thought that he didn't know if he liked brown people simply for the reason that he could give me was that they're always in trouble and they're very loud. But this is what our brains do. And when you're a child and you are around adults that have perceptions and beliefs, and then you hear those things, you can't kick it out and rebuttal it when your brain is in those subconscious patterns, those meditative brain waves where you are literally just a sponge. So when you start to see examples of the things programmed in your subconscious in real life, what it does is reinforce for you that what you heard is true. Just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. And this is what I work with on a typical basis with my clients, because we all have a lot of thoughts and beliefs about things that do not serve us, that are not true. And the reason that we're in the situation that we're in our world right now with race and racial, injustice and prejudice and all of that is because you have a collective group of people that have thoughts and beliefs, even stored subconsciously, even things that feel very innocent, but every time they see it, their brain reinforces that it's true. And we have to be willing to look at that and question it. Even people like me who, I'm biracial, but I was raised in a white household. I can still remember things that my family said about Black people. And you might be like, oh my God, she was biracial. This is horrible. And yes, it is. And I still find myself arguing with specific family members, trying to educate, and they want no parts of hearing it. And that is where what I have found in, silence being very offensive. Like, I know that I saw a lot of kickback on Facebook from people saying, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to help. I don't know what the right thing is to say because I accept all people, or I don't see color. But I think the thing for Black people is that you do need to see color and accept the color and embrace the color. And rather than have maybe blanket beliefs about the race as a whole, that you really become an ally and supporter in understanding that Black people have been oppressed for a very long time, that our opportunities have not been the same because of the way that the system works, because of white people who have felt like we have to keep them at a level below us, right? And so this shows up in different ways, and sometimes what feels very innocent ways. And I don't know that it matters so much that you know the right things to say as much as you're willing to speak out against injustice and willing to be wrong and willing to be corrected and willing to hear what needs to be heard so that we can move forward, and I think that's why it's scary for people to speak up in general, because they're afraid of what that's going to feel like to be wrong, what that's going to feel like to receive negative emotion or negative feedback. Because again, a part of the human experience is that we never want to be wrong. Our brain is always in a state of protection. You know this if you've been listening to this podcast for a while. Your brain is always trying to protect you, and it's always wanting to prove that it's right. So when you are introduced a new idea, but you've had this belief for most of your life, your brain's automatic reaction is to kick back and get very, very defensive. And I've been able to witness this an entire week, with people that were very upset about the protesting and the riots. And what was very interesting was to witness from a coaching perspective, if I could pick the humanness out of me, as a biracial person seeing these comments and really just see the comments without negative thoughts. Like I was trying to use my coaching mind as much as possible. But it was very interesting to see the thought patterns that people had and their justifications for their belief system, or how they felt like they truly didn't have bias or prejudice or any sort of racial thinking. And then they would post something that completely negated what they had previously said, and they didn't see it at all. And for some, they weren't willing to see it. When, a Black person would say, I really want you to see this and understand this, if it didn't match their thought process and their belief that they've reinforced over and over again. Because remember, a belief is just a thought that you have thought so many times, it becomes a belief. So this is why I say, just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. And just because you have a belief doesn't mean it's true. Because you can think a million times, I'm ugly, I'm ugly, I'm ugly, I'm ugly. And before you know it, you believe that that is who you are. Even if it's not true, you believe that because you had the thought and you reinforced it so many times that now it's true. So I remember growing up and hearing a lot of times that I needed to be afraid in certain parts of town. That was something that my family instilled in me. Like if we went to a bad neighborhood, quote unquote bad neighborhood, I needed to make sure that the doors were locked. I needed to make sure, we were safe. And a lot of times what I would see in those neighborhoods were Black people. And so there was a piece of me, and there was a piece inside of me that feared going to specific neighborhoods and feared Black people, especially if they were in one of those neighborhoods that my family said wasn't safe. So I would see someone Black and automatically have this belief that maybe I'm not safe because this is what I've been told. And it wasn't until I was older where I could question that and be like, why is that? And where my eyes were no longer focused on just the Black people in those neighborhoods, but white people and other races as well. But still, you have to be willing to see where you're wrong. You have to be willing to take years of reinforced thoughts and rewire them. So again, those first 7 years of life, you are completely subjectable to everything that is coming in your senses. Everything that's coming in becomes hardwired programming. And then that hardwired programming, when you get to a stage where you can question it, your brain is automatically gearing towards proving that those subconscious beliefs that you've heard the first 7 years of life are correct. So while you can logic and you can ask questions and you can begin to formulate who you are without the influence of the people around you, there is a piece of your brain that was programmed in such a way where it's going to look for evidence that you're correct. And this is why this is so difficult to change, and why it's going to take time, and why we need people who are willing to just be wrong, willing to just listen, willing to rewire their thoughts and become an ally. Because if you were told your entire life, like, Black people just want a handout, or Black people are the ones that are on welfare, or whatever it is, right? You're going to look for all of that evidence that your thinking is correct. And it shows up in such sneaky ways, like prejudice, bias, racism. It shows up in a lot of sneaky ways where you feel like you are not that person. And I think that this becomes offensive to Black people because, like, here's something that I hear. I'm not kidding. This is something that I've heard. One common thing being that when people, let's say I'm in a group of people, we're at a party, because this has happened, and people start with the Black jokes, or they think that saying the N-word back and forth to their white friend is funny and that we're going to laugh. And we never think that's funny, by the way. But let's say that they start joking about Black people. There's a few things that are happening here. One, we're wondering why our white friends think that it is okay, because we're very uncomfortable by it. Okay, so we're wondering why no one will speak up, because in that moment, our emotions are high. So if we react, right, there's going to be greater consequences for a Black person to react than it is for a white person. If someone has a racial slur and my husband decides, that's not cool, I'm going to take you out back and talk to you about it, or, it becomes physical, the consequences for my husband are going to be much greater than if one of our white friends did that same action. And that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about, where there are differences, but sometimes people refuse to see it or think about what it's like for us. And so when no one speaks up on our behalf, it becomes a problem, because you've now essentially, what you've told us is that you condone that kind of behavior. And what it says for the person that does it is that they're validated in the things that they're saying, even if it's wrong, and, completely just vile. And what usually remains is that the person that witnesses it feels like, I didn't know what to say. I knew that it was wrong. My soul gave me that gut reaction that it's wrong, but I didn't know what to say. And another thing that happens is that people are like, I'm just kidding. Like, I have Black friends. So they will justify their actions, their vile actions with, I'm not racist. I have Black friends, which is so very interesting, because it's like, why do you think that this is okay because you have Black friends? Like, it completely blows my mind. It really does. It blows my mind. But something that I've actually heard in my own groups of friends, and I don't even know that they've realized it. And at the time, I should have spoken up about it, but I was just like, what? Being biracial, I've had friends say, yeah, but you don't act Black. Or I've actually had adults, I don't remember where I was, but I've had adults say, yeah, but you're not like other Black people. You're the good kind, to me and my husband. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute. Huh? And they feel like nothing is wrong with that. Like, they feel like that should be us taking a compliment. Yeah, you're Black, but you're not like the rest of them. You're not like everyone else that's Black. You're different. You fit in here. And that's very interesting. So we have to be willing to question our thoughts. We have to be willing to rewire our mind. We really do. And if you struggle with just rewiring your mind in general, I do have a digital course on courses.macierenae.com. It is called Rewired, and it's a really good introduction, foundational point for understanding rewiring the mind in general, just general beliefs. But to close, I just wanted to share some of the experiences that we've had and that I've had being biracial, and some of the things that I shared in my post. So I'm going to read it. Maybe it'll impact you. I got so much feedback on it. So many people said it was helpful. So I'm just going to read exactly what I wrote. Stand for something or you'll fall for anything. This quote keeps ringing in my ears. For those of you that have been silent, trust me, I understand it. I used to be silent too. I hate confrontation. I hate politics. I hate liars. I hate division. I hate arguing. And in being honest, I hate being uncomfortable. Ding, ding, ding. Welcome to most people's problem in life. We never want to feel uncomfortable, ever. When we are uncomfortable, that means our brain is no longer in autopilot thinking, autopilot doing, or autopilot being. When we are uncomfortable, we are flooded with negative emotion, and that negative emotion makes the human body feel bad. But this is the reason people of color are angry, because people of color have never been able to have the privilege of being comfortable. And the silence feels like you are looking away because you are uncomfortable. And when I say people of color haven't had the privilege of feeling quote unquote comfortable, I don't mean people of color are looking for an advantage. People of color are fighting to be an equal. Equal in the way they and I as a whole are viewed, talked to, talked about, and treated. Becoming quote unquote comfortable has never been something people of color have experienced walking among society because we can't unzip our varying shades of brown skin. Let me tell you some stories. As a biracial woman, I have experienced privilege in being raised in a white household. As a biracial woman, my ears have heard more than I care to repeat, and my eyes have witnessed more than I care to see, even in my own family, and I'm sick over it. When my husband and I first started dating, his aunt called to ask me a favor. She said, "Mace, will you call this person and ask if their house is still available for rent?" I naively responded, "Sure, but why am I calling for you?" She said, "Well, I've called 4 times and left 4 voicemails, and they aren't returning my call." So I naively responded, "Well, maybe they're just super busy, but I'll call them." She said, "Well, baby girl, I think I sound too black. You sound like a white woman. I hate to be like that, but will you see if they respond to you?" I will never forget the shock. It never occurred to me. So I called, and I breathed a huge sigh of relief when they didn't answer. Surely they aren't racist. I left 1 voicemail. They called me back in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. This white person called me back so excited I was interested in their house because I, quote unquote, sound white over the phone. His aunt never got a call. Do you know how disgusted I was when I had to call her back to tell her they immediately called me back? Effing yuck. Or when my husband and I were applying for our house and the mortgage lender, a white man, said, "That's kind of a nice house for people like you. Maybe you should choose something else." I'm sorry, what? People like us? WTF? Or when we went to a local Frankfurt restaurant and I told the hostess, "Just 2, please." She said, "Oh, are you here to sit with them?" I looked at her sideways. "It's just us. Who is them?" And she proceeded to point to the only 2 people of color sitting in the entire restaurant. Oh, bish. Cortez had to pull me back for that one. Or when we moved into our home and every time my black husband would wave to our white neighbor, he would blatantly look away. Oh, until he found out what my husband does for a living. And then the other day, that same neighbor told my husband, "Don't expect any of the neighbors around here to really speak to you guys." What? First of all, they do. Why are you saying that? Why wouldn't our neighbors speak to us? Because you wouldn't even look at us for almost 2 years and you happen to be a white pastor? Got it. Or when my husband helped a friend in a $350,000 neighborhood and it ended in cops being called the N-word and a little boy who probably doesn't even have a job or education. My husband has a bachelor's, a master's, and almost MBA degree, by the way. Plus threats of losing everything, all because he knocked on a white person's door to simply ask a question and she, quote unquote, feared for her life. One cop deeply understood his pain and was so wonderful, and the other, if left alone with my husband, could have led to a different ending. And PPS, my husband and I hate that all law enforcement officers are being grouped into one quote unquote bad category because we consider several law enforcement officers are great friends. Or when a family of mine proceeded to respond to a random mixed baby comment months ago as, "Ew, that's disgusting." And another family member in my defense said, "Are you kidding me? You are so racist and ignorant." To which they responded, "I'm not racist. I'm allowed to have my opinion. White should stay with white. Black should stay with black. If I was racist, I wouldn't be around Macie. Riddle me that." But you know what hurt me most in that situation? The silence. That some of the people I so badly wanted to speak up for me, that I would have expected to without question, their own blood didn't. Not a word, silence. The ignorance runs so deep. I have cried for days. So yes, while I know your heart may ache, while I understand you hate this all, and while I get that you don't know what to say, please say something, anything. We are all uncomfortable, especially people of color not being treated as an equal. It is so very painful to me to witness the silence of some, and yet a piece of me keeps saying, if there are people in your own bloodline that won't even speak up for you when racist things are being said, or speak up for people of color when racist things are being done, like murder, and they speak louder over the abuse of an animal, and they speak louder over the destruction, and they speak louder over everything else. Macie, why would you expect anyone else to speak up for you or a person of color? And while this may rub you in all the wrong ways and make you feel uncomfortable, it should. Because if you choose to stay on autopilot and you choose to stay silent and you choose to be blind to it all, you're not using your privilege to be the voice for people of color who do not have that privilege. We need people that have privilege to understand how their privilege serves them. Grab some books if you're confused. Make a choice. Choose turning off your autopilot thinking, being, and doing, and to be so damn uncomfortable by this world that change is demanded, because we are also uncomfortable. But unlike you, we cannot change our skin. So that was my post. It was very well received. Again, 121 shares, and I got so many messages about thank you for helping me see this from a different perspective. Some of the feedback that I got back was, I can't believe you were treated that way. People who know me and my husband. And I will say in regards to that is another area where you can really question your brain, because people gave feedback that I didn't know that this kind of stuff was still happening or that this still existed, especially to people like you, and meaning that they couldn't see us being treated that way, having all of our stuff together. But the overall overarching point is that nobody should be treated that way. No matter who you are, no matter what color your skin is, especially Black people in general, that no one should be told they should choose a different house because it's too nice for people like us, or have the cops called in a very nice neighborhood because my husband simply knocked on the door to ask a question and that person feared for her life. It's things like that. And while you might not be able to fathom how it happens to people like us, where you know us and we're really good people, what I want you to understand as an overall point is that no one should be treated that way. White people are not typically treated that way. We are, due to the color of our skin, and we don't have the ability to change it. So what I'm asking is that when you hear something that does not feel right, because your gut usually does feel punched, it usually does feel like that's not humanness, that's not right, that's very interesting that you have that thought. It doesn't mean that you have to be aggressive, but if you get a nudge from your soul to say something because you don't agree, it would be very progressive to even ask that person why they said that, or why they think that way, or why they feel that's true, or just say simply, I disagree. It doesn't mean that you have to lash out, start a fight with them, or be aggressive. Just follow that nudge in your heart if that doesn't sound right to you. And if you find yourself agreeing, really ask yourself why that is. And I promise you that you're not the only one doing the work. You know, if you're a white person listening to this, that you're not the only person doing the work. I'm still doing this work with all of my biases and with all of the opinions and things that I have because of things that maybe were stored in my subconscious based on my upbringing, other people's thoughts, other people's beliefs, my environment, and reprogramming that. And in general, I spend my life reprogramming myself to figure out what is possible in the world. Just like I reprogram thoughts around money, and money doesn't grow on trees. And, you know, in order to make a lot of money, you have to have a job in the medical field, or you have to be in law. Like, who told me those things? My family told me those things. But why did they say those things? Because those were their beliefs. I adopted that. Right? I lived my life with subconscious programming that the medical field was safe, or the medical field was the way to make money. And then what did I find myself even in COVID, not even having a job? So you have to question everything. And that's what working with a life coach helps you do, is question everything. When you're ready to dive into coaching, or you're ready to dive into your own personal development journey, the whole point of personal development is questioning everything, because we all have bias. But what is happening with the Black community is wrong. It is very, very wrong. And it will be very easy for this to go by the wayside if you're not going to be an active participant in questioning your own thoughts and patterns. Because everything that you're thinking about it, even when it's wrong or subtle, has likely come from subconscious programming based on what you heard, experienced, saw, and then it was reinforced over and over again, so it doesn't feel like it's wrong. So what I would encourage you to do in general is question everything, right? And if something doesn't feel right in your heart and soul, question what that is. And really be willing to see things from another perspective, and know that if you are opening yourself up to learn, that there will be times where it is very, very vulnerable, where you will be wrong, at times, and have to sit with that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There might be times where if you're talking to a Black person and they correct you, that feels very icky. And just be willing to sit in those feelings. If you can't remember how to sit in the negative emotion, I know that I have podcasts on that, because that's essentially where this podcast came from, buffering. Like, you have to be willing to sit with your stuff and question everything. So I know this is a little bit longer of an episode, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that it was insightful. And if you want to continue doing this work, I want to invite you into my Becoming Her program that has been and is being completely revamped. Check it out on my website, macierenae.com. And if you have questions about it, please be sure to reach out to me. This is a program for lifelong coaching and lifelong personal development, and should be and feel like a resource and a community where you can come to rewire all of your programming and become your highest self. So if you love what you're learning on the podcast, Becoming Her is going to, from this point forward, be my signature program and the container where I teach you everything, okay? So I am not so much eliminating my other programs, but everything that I do when it comes to group coaching will be in the Becoming Her program, because I want it to become a community where we are constantly stripping down the beliefs that don't serve us, and we are stepping into our highest self as a community, all lifting each other up. That sounds really good to my soul. So if that's something you're interested in and you have questions, you can visit macierenae.com, or you can shoot me a message. I hope that this helps you. I'll see you next Monday.